I was spending New Year's Eve alone, the cold wind hitting the windows, and the silence of the house was almost suffocating. It was then that I heard a crack coming from the backyard, followed by a soft noise, as if something or someone was moving among the shadows. My heart raced and a wave of fear washed over me. With trembling hands I approached the window and peered through the curtain's gap. What I saw left me speechless. Hello, my friends. I am Linda, and this is the Linda's Stories channel. I hope you enjoy this story. The silence was so dense that Thomas could hear the ticking of the clock echoing through the house. On the brink of another December 31st, he was preparing for another night of solitude. Since Eleanor's death 3 years ago, he had closed himself off from the world. He ignored news, social media, calls, and messages. Friends tried to reach out to him in various ways, but he never responded. He only went out for the essentials, moving with heavy steps through silent streets. At 68 years old, he told himself that celebrations no longer mattered, but he knew that fear and emptiness were the real reasons for his isolation. The dining table, once filled with steaming dishes and glasses of wine at Christmas and New Year's Eve dinners, now held only a solitary plate with the remnants of a frozen meal he had barely touched. On the sideboard, photographs of his children, Daniel and Sarah, smiled, frozen in time when they still lived nearby. Daniel now worked as an engineer in a city 800 kilometers away. Sarah had married and moved abroad with her diplomat husband. Both called regularly, inviting him to visit to spend the holidays with them, but Thomas always refused. "I'm fine here," he lied. "You have your lives, don't worry about me." The truth was that Thomas was afraid of being a burden, afraid that his sadness would contaminate his children's happiness, afraid of not knowing how to live in a world that kept on spinning while he felt he had stopped in time. Struggling to his feet, Thomas walked to the kitchen. The wooden floor creaked under his steps, as if the house itself were moaning from loneliness. In the refrigerator, a bottle of sparkling wine, bought out of habit, not for celebration, awaited the turning of the year. Next to it, a dessert dish he had prepared earlier, a recipe Eleanor made every year. It was his silent way of keeping her present, reproducing her traditions, even if no one besides him would appreciate it. Thomas opened the kitchen window, letting the cold night air in. In the distance he could hear music and laughter coming from neighbouring houses where families were gathering for the last night of the year. There was a time when his house also overflowed with life on these occasions. Eleanor would decorate every corner with lights, prepare food for an army, and they would welcome friends and family until the dawn of the new year. The cell phone on the table was flashing persistently. Unread messages had been accumulating for weeks. Some names he recognized, old colleagues from the time he taught history at the local university, well-meaning neighbors, the few friends who still tried to reach out to him. Thomas had gradually distanced himself from everyone. First, by declining invitations, then by not returning calls, finally, by ignoring even the most affectionate messages. His world had been reduced to that 3-bedroom house in the quiet neighborhood, the corner grocery store he visited once a week, and the small bookstore where he bought books that piled up, unread, on the side tables. "Looks like we're going to toast together again," he murmured to Eleanor's portrait above the refrigerator, a solitary habit he had developed. In the photo, she smiled under a straw hat during a trip they took to the coast 5 years ago. Her eyes still sparkled with life, without any hint of the disease that would later consume her. The clock in the living room struck 11:20 at night, 40 minutes to midnight, to the close of another year without her, to the start of another equally empty one. Thomas sighed and decided he didn't need to stay awake to see the year change. What difference did it make? One day was the same as the next in his calendar of solitude. It was at that moment that he heard it. A crack coming from the backyard, followed by the sound of movement. Thomas froze, his heart racing instantly. In recent months, since the burglaries in the neighborhood had increased as reported by the local newspapers he rarely read, any untimely noise put him on alert. Another noise, more distinct now. It wasn't just his imagination. There was someone, or something, in his backyard. The initial fear gave way to a sudden indignation. It was New Year's Eve, and even on this night, he couldn't have peace. With careful steps, Thomas approached the living room window that faced the back of the house. The thin curtain filtered the darkness outside, but he could discern movements. He took a deep breath, gathering courage, and gently pulled the fabric aside to look. What he saw left him breathless. Small colourful lights shimmered among the backyard trees, like fireflies dancing in the darkness. They weren't thieves' lanterns or teenagers playing pranks. They were decorative lights, carefully hung on the trees Eleanor had planted years ago. And under those lights, silhouettes moved cautiously. Silhouettes that, even in the dim light, seemed strangely familiar. Thomas rubbed his eyes, thinking it might be a hallucination brought on by loneliness, fatigue, or the glass of wine he had drunk earlier. But the figures remained, and now one of them lit what seemed to be a small portable grill. Another spread a cloth over the garden table that hadn't been used in years. A third figure carried what looked like a cooler box. Thomas felt his legs weaken. He leaned against the windowsill, his heart pounding in his chest. There were people in his backyard. People organising what appeared to be a celebration. With trembling fingers, he unlocked the back door and took 2 steps outside. The cold night air enveloped him instantly, but he barely felt it. His eyes were fixed on the people who were now turning to face him, smiles illuminated by the soft glow of the decorations. "Professor Thomas!" The voice came from a middle-aged man whom Thomas recognized, after a few seconds of confusion, as his former student and later colleague in the university department. "Happy almost New Year!" As Thomas's eyes adjusted to the darkness, the silhouettes around him became clearer. He recognized old college friends with whom he had spent entire nights discussing history and sharing youthful dreams. He saw the couple that he and Eleanor used to visit in the summers, companions on trips and in endless card games. There was also a close friend of Eleanor's from their teenage years, who had closely witnessed every stage of the couple's life, all smiling, all there in his backyard, on the last night of the year. What? How? Thomas couldn't articulate a complete sentence, the surprise stealing his words. Betty, Eleanor's longtime friend, approached, holding a plate covered with aluminum foil. "You weren't answering our calls. You weren't responding to our messages. After so long trying to include you in our celebrations, we decided that if you wouldn't come to us, we would come to you." "But how did you know I'd be alone?" Thomas's voice came out more fragile than he intended. "Sarah told us," replied Harold, his great friend, approaching with 2 glasses. "She called Linda a week ago, worried because you had refused once again to spend New Year's with her in Lisbon. She said you made up an excuse about already having plans with your old friends." Thomas felt a pang of shame. It was true. He had lied to his daughter, saying he would celebrate with friends, when in fact he was planning another solitary night. "So we decided to make your lie come true," Betty finished, smiling as she adjusted her grey hair. "You have friends, Thomas. You've always had them. You just forgot." Stephen approached, extending a hand to the old professor. "Eleanor wouldn't want to see you like this, isolated, letting life pass by. She was the most lively person we've ever known." Hearing his wife's name brought tears to Thomas's eyes. It was true. Eleanor loved people, loved celebrations. How many times had she said that life was too short to waste joyful moments? "We don't know what it's like to lose a partner of decades," Linda continued, her voice gentle. "But we do know what it's like to miss a dear friend. And we miss you, Thomas." The words hit Thomas like waves crashing against rocks. How long had it been since he allowed someone to really get close? How long since he had felt the warmth of a sincere conversation, a friendly hug, a shared meal? "I don't know what to say," he murmured, his voice choked. "You don't need to say anything," George replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You just need to be present. Start coming back to the land of the living, one step at a time." Thomas looked around at his decades-old friends gathered in his backyard on the last night of the year. It was as if he had returned to his youth once again. People who, despite his silence and reclusion, hadn't given up on him. People who cared enough to invade his private space with light and warmth. A familiar aroma reached his nostrils. Sausages on the grill, the unmistakable scent of the apple pie that Linda always made. Sounds of glasses clinking, subdued laughter, conversations in low tones so as not to disturb the neighbours. Life in all its simplicity and complexity was returning to occupy space in his world. "We still have 20 minutes until midnight," Stephen said, checking his watch. "Enough time to set up a decent table and open that sparkling wine that's probably hidden in your fridge." Thomas couldn't help but give a faint smile. It was small details like this that showed that his friends really knew him. They knew his habits, his quiet traditions. "I also have a dish of dessert," he finally said. "I made it earlier. Eleanor's recipe." Linda's eyes lit up. "Perfect. I brought a trifle. Harold and Betty brought a cheese platter. And George brought that Portuguese wine you like so much." Slowly, as if awakening from a long torpor, Thomas began to move. He helped set the table in the backyard, went into the house to get the sparkling wine and French toast, found extra glasses and cutlery for everyone. Each movement seemed difficult, as if his muscles were relearning long-forgotten movements. But it also felt strangely liberating. As they worked together, conversations flowed naturally. News about old colleagues, about the neighbourhood, about recent books George recommended. No one directly mentioned his reclusion or how much it had worried everyone, but the affection between the lines was evident. The clock struck 11:55. Everyone gathered around the table, glasses ready. Thomas felt a lump in his throat when Harold proposed a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass, "and to old friendships that endure despite distances and silences." The glasses clinked softly in the cold night. Thomas looked up at the sky, where stars shone impassively, and thought of Eleanor. What would she say seeing him now, surrounded by friends, finally allowing himself a glimpse of joy again? Perhaps she would say it was about time. That morning had its time and place, but life insisted on moving forward. That there was beauty in allowing oneself to feel again, even with all the scars. The first fireworks began to explode in the distance, announcing the arrival of the new year. Briefly, ephemeral colours illuminated the faces around the table. Thomas felt a hand resting on his. It was Linda, her gentle eyes conveying a silent understanding. "Happy New Year, Thomas," she said softly. "Happy New Year," he replied, and for the first time in a long while, he felt that maybe it could be. As the sky filled with lights and the air with sounds of celebration, Thomas realized something fundamental. Loneliness was a choice he had made, not a sentence he had to serve. And even in the darkest moments, when it seemed that all light had vanished, there were people carrying small lanterns, patiently waiting for him to be ready to see them. The clock in the room struck midnight. A new year began. And for Thomas, perhaps, a new chance to learn to live again. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.